back as always on a Wednesday morning with another episode of the King's Information Network podcast. We're working our way through book 2, which is Confronting the Past. And we are all the way up to chapter 14. So let's get going. Chapter 14. The front door slammed open and Shannon marched into the room, plainly furious. "Well, what are you going to do now?" she snapped, stepping into Sorin's space and glaring. "What do you mean?" he asked slowly, keeping his hands down by his side to appear unthreatening. The two teens, who had to be Paul and Tim, inched in behind their boss and shut the door. Colin frowned from his position on the couch next to Sorin. Dean tensed, looking ready to get between Shannon and his dad, but Sorin gestured slightly, telling him to stay put. Both boys looked miserable, which was all Sorin needed to see. Russ had been planning things. Sorin had his suspicions. "What are you going to do now?" she repeated slowly. He marched into hostler territory, and what was always going to happen, happened. Sorin let out a breath. "Goddamn. Okay, first, Russ is a big boy, Shannon. He can make his own decisions. You're supposedly his best friend, and neither of you assholes fought him going." Colin opened his mouth, but Sorin beat him to it. "No, we didn't. But Russ is both extremely well-trained and very smart. He made his choice to go this morning very deliberately." She stared at him. "You're saying he meant to get stabbed and dragged into hostler headquarters?" she sputtered furiously. "I'm saying that he knows Christopher Malone better than any of us, even you. He took a calculated risk knowing all the variables. As such, we now need to work with those same variables and adjust our plans accordingly." Shannon glared at him. "How can you be so damn calm?" "Because the only way to save him at this point is to distract Malone and give us enough of a chance to act like we were already planning." "Shouldn't you be on your way to help him now?" she asked. But Sorin knew it was asked from a place of impotent frustration. "Why aren't you?" he replied. Her mouth worked for a moment until she settled on an answer. "He would have wanted me to tell you. You could have sent Paul, or Tim, or anyone," he pointed out. "Why aren't you on your way there?" She let out a breath and sagged, sinking onto the coffee table. The bastard fucking knew, didn't he? That's what he was trying to say without saying yesterday in the kitchen. I made him promise the wrong damn thing. He never wanted to die, but he knew Chris wouldn't wait very long before taking it out on Morgan, or Matt, or both. Exactly. We all should have asked closer questions, but we didn't, and Russ enacted his own plan. But he didn't leave us without resources, or without a chance to still rescue all three of them. She closed her eyes and took a series of deep breaths. Colin gestured the two teens in, and Dean relaxed, although his gaze remained fixed on Shannon. "So what's next?" she finally asked, looking back at Sorin. He returned to his seat on the couch. "We'll get Russ out of there, the same way we were planning on getting Morgan and Matt out." "Okay, but the diversion wasn't planned for another couple of days. Are we moving that up?" "I think so, yes. It's perfectly reasonable to seem desperate now that he's grabbed Russ. However, he'll absolutely be expecting it, so we'll need to really look at how and who we send to the headquarters. And you're certain Malone won't kill Russ?" "Everything Russ has said to me over the years about Christopher Malone leads me to believe he'll take his time, which means we, in turn, have time. That's if you expect Malone to act rationally. He doesn't. He acts completely on impulse." "I've spent almost my entire life studying people and the way they react in certain circumstances," he told her quietly, holding her gaze. "Yes, Malone's actions in general are irrational at best. However, he still acts consistently within that irrationality. He loves nothing more than toying with his victims. That's why Matt and Morgan are still alive, and it's why Russ will still be in a couple of days as well. That I can promise you." "Sorin's right," Colin said, finally interrupting. "Malone's out of his mind, there's no question about that, but he still works within a certain personal code no matter what. It's why you've managed to live alongside him so long." So she rubbed her face. "Malone will torture him." Sorin sighed, shoulders slumping. Russ should have trusted him. Maybe they could have come up with another way. Still, they needed to work with what they had. "I know, and trust me, I wish there was some way I could have avoided that for Russ, or Matt, or Morgan. I know what it's like, and it's not something I would wish on anyone. Not even people like Malone or my father. However, Russ, despite what he often says and thinks, is an extremely strong person. He's resilient and tough. If anything, when we march in there, Malone will already be dead by Russ's hand." He smiled faintly. "Time can, in all honesty, heal almost any wound, Shannon. It's an awful and sad thing to say, but it's true. None of them will come out of this untouched, but we'll work with them." "I'll trust you two on this," she said, "but I don't like it." "Understandable and reasonable," Sorin told her. "Now," he waved Paul and Tim forward. "Who's who?" The slightly older one glanced at Shannon, who made a go-ahead gesture. "I'm Paul. This is Tim." "Good. I'm Sorin. This is Dean." Despite everything, he almost laughed when neither teen so much as blinked at his name. They might put it together, but for now he'd take advantage of their ignorance. Based on their age, they would have barely been teens at all when Ren became king. and in a city as insular as Greyspire, it didn't exactly surprise him they didn't clock his name. Tell me everything you saw. Also, before I forget, you two, remember, none of this is your fault. I know too well how incredibly stubborn Russ can be, and I told you to follow his orders. You did your best, and I'm very proud of how quickly you got back with the news, and how you've handled yourself since this whole thing started, Shannon told them seriously. Agreed, Colin said. Sorin nodded. Have a seat and tell us every detail you can remember. The pair settled in. We are sorry, though, Paul said, but we knew there was nothing we could do. Malone probably knew we were there and wanted us to tell, but it still seemed like the right thing to do. It was, Colin assured them. Now what else did you see? Tim and Paul took turns recounting their excursion and Russ's subsequent capture. The kids were good, though, and had seen enough of Chris's force and defenses to give them a good idea of what they might be up against. Then, the group of them set about modifying the plans. Hours later, well after Shannon and the teens had left, Colin slumped and glanced at Sorin. What if we're wrong? About Malone? Sorin rubbed at his eyes. I'm sure we're not, but I agree, we should check it out. Colin sat up again, completely alert. Really? I hadn't even asked. You don't need to by now. There is, however, the problem of my son. I'm not a problem, Dean protested from where he was flopped in his own chair. I can hold my own. Yes, you've gotten the benefit of a lot of training from people who are very good at what they do. But I'm still your dad, and you're still a kid. I'm not willing to risk your life to test that one way or another. So either one of us can go, Colin, or we need a safe place for Dean. Colin rubbed his chin. The only place would be with Shannon. Malone's going to be sitting happy now that he has Russ as well as Matt and Morgan. I sincerely doubt he's going to be after anyone when he's got 3 prisoners to play with. Sorin sat back. I was hoping to keep Shannon out of this. She can, under no circumstances, accompany us. We need her to help mobilize Greyspire, especially with Russ gone. This is a city that respects their own and not so much outsiders. She'll want to, though, Dean said, looking a bit put out at being told no, but his son was very smart and Sorin knew he understood. Sorin worked hard to be protective, but not overprotective, which was hard. We're going to have to tell her she can't, that she's our connection with Greyspire as a whole, and we can't let her risk herself, Colin said. She's not going to like that, Dean replied. No, she's not. Are you okay with staying with her while we scout things out? Sorin asked him. Dean sighed. Yeah, sure. Tim and Paul seem like fun, and Tim said their friend Margs is only 13, so that's not much older than me. Sorin shifted his son so he could look him in the eye. You're to listen to Shannon, though, as well as the older kids, and not go anywhere. Understand? Promise, Dad, Dean told him impatiently. He made a face at Sorin's firm look. Promise, he repeated. Then it's settled. Colin, do you know how to get to Shannon's headquarters? Yes, but not Malone's. Sorin frowned. I always knew I should have studied Greyspire better when I first learned where Russ was from. It seems we'll need a guide. Paul would do it, Dean said. Shannon will really hate that. Well, she'll have to deal with that too, Sorin said flatly. She can't go. I shouldn't even be letting you go, Colin, but I suspect that even with Malone, you'd still have some chance of amnesty, despite his threats. He doesn't want to bring the crown down on him yet, and I'm sure he realizes that's precisely what Lieutenant Johnson would do if you suddenly up and vanished. Good. Glad you see the wisdom, because there was no way I was being left behind again, Colin said dryly. I wouldn't dream of trying, he said seriously before standing. Come on, no time like the present. We want to try at night? Isn't that when Shannon said they're most active? Exactly. I think we made a tactical error with the morning approach, and Russ knew it and purposely didn't say anything. It means everyone's not as busy and gave Malone more of a chance to notice Russ's approach. I should have realized he might be expecting a move like that. He's off-kilter, but not stupid by any means. Dean scrambled up, eyeing them both. That means it's my turn to tell you both to be careful. You go. You make sure Russ and the others are alive, then you come right back. I promise. Actually, food first, then we go. Sorin started down the stairs right before they were set to go, but paused as he heard Dean and Colin. He looks a lot like his mom, Dean said. Yeah, I've noticed the same thing, Colin agreed. I look more like my dad, and so does Jez. I've heard you and Jez look a lot alike. While Annie, and sometimes even Wren, had visited regularly, often bringing their toddler daughter, Renee, Dean had never been to Oakbridge. None of them could quite agree on whether it was safe. Colin laughed. We do. I'm a bit taller, but we have the same color eyes and hairs. Like you and your dad, although Sorin's hair is a couple shades darker than yours. Yeah, Dad says I don't really look like my mom at all, but he can still see pieces of her in me, and that his hair was the same when he was my age. I'd suspect he would. I'm sure anyone who knew your mother could, but especially your dad. Sorin pressed his lips together. He tried to talk about Diana with Dean, but it was so hard sometimes, an entirely different life. He took a deep breath and continued down the stairs. Dean looked up. You're taking your sword, Dad? His son asked in surprise. Sorin rarely brought out his sword, and only when sparring with either Colin or Russ. Most of the time, they used wooden practice swords, or he kept a knife. Yes, I figured better safe than sorry, Sorin replied. Everyone ready? Absolutely. The trio headed over and were immediately welcomed into the headquarters and explained the plan to Shannon. Shannon, despite her obvious unhappiness, did in fact understand their reasoning as she sat behind her desk rubbing the bridge of her nose. I don't like it. You know I've got to go too, Paul said reasonably, standing in front of her, back straight, clearly proud he was needed. I can get them there and back better than anyone. We were just there, and Tim and Margs can hang with Dean. She frowned. I don't like putting you at risk again so soon, Paul. Who knows why they let you go this morning? You're my responsibility. You all are, and I'm not about to forget that. She glanced over at where Sorin, Dean, and Colin were standing off to the side, leaving this part of the argument entirely between the two. All of you are, since you're all Russ's friends. However, I don't get a say over the three of you. She sighed. You're sure you're up for this, Paul? The teen nodded. Positive. I know I can do it. I did it the night you needed to know if Matt and Morgan were being held by Malone. Tim and Margs did too. It's not that hard at night. Shannon sighed. Very well. I expect you won't be back too late. Shouldn't be, so long as everything goes according to plan, Sorin said in affirmation. If you're not back much later than midnight, I'm going in after you. Deal, Colin said. So we're all set? Sorin asked, watching Shannon. She nodded, jaw set unhappily. Yes, we're ready, she said tightly. Be careful. Come on, Dean. Tim's and Margs are outside, Paul said, jerking his head towards the door. I'll introduce you to Margs. Only a few minutes later, the three, Paul, Sorin, and Colin, were slipping through the foggy night towards Malone's headquarters, mimicking the path that Paul, Russ, and Tim had taken earlier that day. Paul had the lead, picking his way confidently down streets unfamiliar to his companions. Sorin insisted on bringing up the rear, and Colin hadn't argued. Eyes peeled and ears straining for noise, they worked their way through Grayspire. They often had to stop and hide in the shadows twice in one block. As a result, it was slow going, but the busyness hopefully meant business as usual, and that Chris wouldn't be looking for them. How'd you manage to find out Matt and Morgan were alive last time? Colin whispered to Paul during a moment of silence. He hesitated. We caught one of their new members. Malone tends to keep new ones back around his headquarters on patrol until they do something to prove themselves capable of anything harder. Shannon doesn't really believe in that, which means although Malone's main crew is tough and hard to beat, his young set is ridiculously raw, where Tim, Margs, and I can do almost anything the older members can do. And actually, we can do it way better sometimes, because we're young, fast, and don't mind taking risks. Shannon doesn't like it, really, but she says it's the way Tyler used to run it. She, Russ, and Matt survived and thrived, so she doesn't feel right taking those same opportunities away from us, even with Malone around now. Is that what we're going to do tonight, too? Paul nodded. You can't actually get inside, not unless you're willing to fight them, which I know isn't the plan, so it's probably the only way. Didn't the kid you caught tell? Yeah, hours after we were gone. I figured out where to hit them not to do permanent damage. But it'll knock someone out for a few hours, he said with an almost apologetic shrug. Colin glanced at him and snorted quietly. Sorin, maybe we should send people here for training before they come to work for kin. Paul grinned. Bet I'd be good at it, he said with all the cocky pride of a teenager. I don't doubt it, he said, before letting the boy pull ahead again as they continued on their way. Going to steal him? Sorin asked, making Colin start. He glanced back and grinned. Think Shannon would ever allow a kin agent back into Grayspire if I did? I suspect Russ could talk her into it quite easily, Sorin said, keeping his tone mild, but he couldn't help a bit of a smirk. Colin snickered. Good point. I'll keep that in mind. He'd undoubtedly make an excellent agent if he wanted to, he said. Colin glanced back and winked before almost bumping into Paul, who'd paused, eyes narrowed. Something's happening, he reported. What? Sorin whispered, sliding by Colin to reach the teen's side. Hear that? Something's happening. Sorin strained to hear faint yelling, trying to identify what it might mean. I hear that. Any idea what? That sounds like Malone, Paul said, frowning. Come on, he added quickly, and scampered forward. Colin and Sorin exchanged a concerned look and followed before he could vanish into the fog entirely. Any ideas? Sorin asked from his position close on Colin's heels. Not really, Paul said with a quick shake of his head, frown deepening. Out of the fog in front of them materialized a crowd, their backs to the trio. That's the Hausler headquarters. We'll need to get closer to see what's going on. Let's do it, Colin said, after exchanging another look with Sorin.